Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Talk Conversation Series, a peer knowledge resource by the CXOs for the CXOs. Now to our host, Kanika Goswami.
Hi everybody. I welcome you to a podcast on stage with enterprise thought leaders. My name is Kanika Goswami and I'm the managing editor of On.media's B2B enterprise technology publications. We have engaging conversations with global thought leaders and industry experts, and I'm told they reach over 1.3 million businesses worldwide. The Netflix series Zero Day presents a very chilling scenario: a cyber attack capable of crippling national infrastructure, forcing a former US president to lead the response while systems are down and tensions are high. But while dramatized for TV, the threats depicted actually aren't very far from reality. The show portrays a sophisticated, advanced, persistent threat, which is an APT, targeting national infrastructure. The kind of thing that would likely involve a multi stage, coordinated campaign, which is leveraging sophisticated tactics and technology which are already seen in real world incidents today. Experts say there's a very high chance that could become a reality. So, what lessons do we take from it? What lessons do security experts take from it? So, today we have with us Rami Riashy. He's a North America Transport Assurance Cybersecurity Principal for the NCC Group, and he is going to discuss with us what he thinks is a real life scenario. We have some questions for supply chain, but I've invited Rami because of his extensive experience in this field. So, Rami, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here today. I will give a short introduction to Rami before we start. He started out as a mechanic with a love for electronic and vehicle communications and went on to study computers and electrical engineering at University of Michigan. After graduating in 2005, he began working as a powertrain testing and vehicle systems applications engineer, and over the next 7 years, developing automated test bed solutions for Delphi, Chrysler, GM, Bosch, and Cummins. He also worked for 6 years in Navistar as a senior systems engineering team lead, responsible for delivering compliant electrical systems globally. After putting in 20 years in the automotive industry with experience in product development, engineering, and systems engineering, he is now focused on cybersecurity of connected vehicles, wireless communications. Rami specializes in in-vehicle networks and communications, and at NCC, he develops cybersecurity processes and tools for all vehicles product development, specializing in secure vehicle architecture. Did I miss out anything on this, Rami?
No, that's very thorough. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's good. So this is a very interesting line, I would say, especially as AI and autonomous cars are rapidly taking over in many parts of the world, at least if not everywhere. We'll be speaking to you more about the risks of APTs to the supply chain and, of course, touching into transportation security for the supply chain. So let's start with the first question. APTs are becoming deadlier with newer tools. How do CISOs stay prepared? I know this is a very high-level question. You can answer it in 1,000 different ways. Choose your poison.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's many ways to be prepared for such attacks like APTs, the advanced persistent threats that really are kind of scary because the way they come in, they're kind of stealthy. You don't expect them, and they're not detected. That's kind of what APTs, usually nation state attacks. They've really evolved to be dangerous in that way because they blend into normal operations and they're so hard to detect. So staying ahead really isn't about prevention. It's about preparation and readiness for those types of attacks. And there's many different kind of points to touch on with preparation. So detection is one way to try to detect an attack like this. There's EDRs, which are endpoint detection and response. It's very important to be prepared and have a culture of awareness. Threat hunting, obviously, is a really important thing to try to find threats and understand what some of the threats could be. Then there's obviously live threat intelligence where you're monitoring in real time. So really, we need to cultivate this type of culture with tabletop exercises, a good governance policy, and being prepared. And if you've heard of like red teaming and blue teaming and also purple teaming, I'll talk about those a lot because they're very important principles for this. So really, we're seeing a culmination of purple teaming, which is not only a red team offensive, but a blue team defensive and a collaboration between the two to really foster that kind of collaboration across the enterprise. And we see this also in transportation, which is the industry that I work in. It's very important. As you mentioned, autonomy, we need to really understand all of the different attack points and entry points for such an attack. So there's the offboard systems. There could be fleet management systems for the vehicles. There could be update management, because now these vehicles and almost any product is evolving over time. You can get real-time updates. There's software that's being pushed out. So really, we need to get that visibility. I think having an EDR system and endpoint detection and response is one of the key principles, and training like it's real, being prepared. So that's really one of the lessons, I think, from the 0 day that you mentioned is that these APTs don't come in through the front door like you would expect. They're very sneaky. So we need to train like it's real.
So as I asked you, what are the tools that are trending looking forward? So APTs already have some standard kind of tools that CISOs use. But as they're changing with, as you say, AI coming in or more automation coming in, even for cyber attacks, what newer tools would you recommend? Or do you see them adopting?
Yeah, I think there's general tools like an MSSP, just managed cyber services that are going to be important. And I think having EDR tools would be good, but I'm really seeing a cross collaboration of integrated and managed EDRs, right? Because just having one data source is not enough. So I think being able to integrate the endpoint, the network, the cloud, the identity, 24/7 SOC monitoring, having a strong SIEM, the threat hunting culture, what we call a playbook in the industry is important to understand how you would react to these. So, and actually NCC as a product, the MXDR is a very strong product to integrate these. And it's not just the EDR, but it's also like actively integrating and managing this with also forensics and post-incident analysis. So it's kind of a cross-functional integration of a really well-managed MSSP. So that's what I would recommend in that case.
Right. So what would you identify as some of the topmost risks to a supply chain when such an attack happens? To the transportation chain,
Yeah, supply chain. I feel that it's one of the most underestimated in cybersecurity today, because attackers nowadays don't need to attack you directly. They can, and there's so many examples of this where an attacker can ride in through a vendor or an update or a software component. So really, that's the scary thing about this. And 0 day showed us this, and there's many examples of malware and how this can ride in. So really, these risks can include operational disruptions, data leakage, a breach of trust. So that's why they're so dangerous. So to mitigate these, there's many, especially in transportation, which I can touch on. There's many different approaches and standards and operating procedures that are happening now that CISOs need to be aware of. So one of them, if we touch on software, is SBOM. So traditionally with any manufacturing, you have bill of materials. The bill of materials focuses on what are the parts, what are the configurations. So SBOM is a software bill of materials. So we need really strong third-party vetting, continuous monitoring of vendor access. So like, who are the vendors? What is their access? And we're not talking about like an annual checklist. It needs to be very continuous. And we've also seen the government support these with an executive order. There's actually an executive order 14028, which touches on some of these important parts to be transparent and be very upfront about your software. And in the transport space, there's regulations in Europe and also for some transit authorities in North America that touch on managing software configurations. What are they? How have they updated? Who has access to them? Where are they stored? So that at any moment in time, we can review and evaluate what the software is. So there's many different ways to mitigate this, but the risks of supply chain are pretty vast. So I think keeping that keen eye on not just the checklist, but continuous improvement, continuous monitoring, and strong vetting of vendors. So that can be site visits, that can be reviews of software bill of materials, transparency for vulnerability management. And really that starts with early contractual agreements with the suppliers. So what we've seen in transportation is there's something called a CDIA or a CIA, which is an agreement between like an OEM and a supplier So we feel that early on in the process, kind of like the sharing of cybersecurity culture, the requirements, and what type of documentation or proof or evidence is required to build the assurance. And it's all about assurance, right? Assurance management. So some key points there, as mentioned, would be the assurance management with suppliers and OEMs.
So, this is off the curriculum. Do you recollect any attack instance which has really crippled a supply chain of one of your clients, or anything that you've read about, or something you can share with us? Because in media or the rest of the world just gets to hear whatever is put out. So we do not really, as an outsider, I do not really understand the real cost of an attack on a supply chain. So do you have any example that you can share with us to just get the scale of the situation?
Yes, absolutely. There's been many instances of this, and we definitely, NCC Group, we have over 14,000 clients worldwide in North America and Europe. So very extensive, deep cybersecurity research, and also just a wide-reaching team that doesn't just do transportation. We're in the enterprise sector, everything from financial to it's really a pretty vast company. So I've definitely seen many examples of breaches and supplier kind of issues that could proliferate into products and OEMs. And I think it comes down to really having a visibility across the full attack surface. So what that means is, if you think of a vehicle and a component and multiple components that come into a vehicle, the vehicle overall has an attack surface summary, but each component is going to add to that in a specific way. So really the OEM is responsible at the end of the delivery for the product, but there can be cases where, I'll give you an example, one of the components may have a debug interface, or even worse, may have diagnostic modes and test modes that could put the vehicle into an unexpected operation. And sometimes the OEM may not be aware of this. This could be a component test case that they're in testing. So really that's why that culture is so important, in understanding the software that's coming into the components, the testing, the collaborative environment of which the components get integrated to the vehicles, and a strong production readiness, similar to the PPAP process that's been around forever. This kind of like production rigor that's important. I think the same in the cybersecurity culture applies. So we've seen some examples of this, and as I mentioned, the management of this is kind of the sharing and the CDIA between the OEMs and the suppliers. And that's specific to automotive, but there's many other cases too, which we can cover, where a supply chain attack could have a nation state impact for something that's not visible openly. And that's why now I think these executive orders and the transparency is so key to just keeping that awareness of where things are coming from, who manipulated them, and having that transparency is key.
Also, do you think that predictive security assessments are enough for CISOs to be prepared? So what you've been saying is they have to be prepared end to end, and they have to be testing it, they have to be checking it out, they have to be making sure of the health, constantly on their guard. So does predictive intelligence or predictive security assessments play a major role in that strategy?
That's a great question. Let's talk about that. When you say predictive, are you implying that something is just feeding itself or based on past risks?
Yes, so there are AI tools that can help with predictive assessments,
Yeah.
probably identifying risk factors or vulnerabilities more than before. So are these enough to keep the CISOs up to date, or up to the mark, or prepared?
Great question. I don't think they're enough. I think they're an excellent starting point. I think some of the best starting points is just looking at history. So what is the data that we have? What is the playbook of known risks, known vulnerabilities, and expected attack paths? These are a good starting point, but I don't think they're enough because of the APTs, because APTs don't really follow the playbook. I think that's the issue, right? The attackers and APTs that come in aren't following this known playbook. And that's really what a 0 day is, something that hasn't been documented or known before. So I think CISOs need to supplement these predictive tools with really just active validation. like we talked about, red teaming, purple teaming, real-time behavioral analytics is also key. And there's some old school examples of like real-time behavioral analytics. For example, preventing a brute force attack. How many times can somebody enter a wrong password? So there's many examples of behavioral analytics, of monitoring a system. That's also part of the EDR process and culture. So to stay ahead of that, I think CISOs need to supplement predictive tools with active validation, the red teaming, the purple teaming. And if you think about red teaming, it's very offensive, it's covert and stealthy. And they're testing some of the test methods that are in place. There could be some attack simulation, but purple teaming is a bit more collaborative. And what that means is there's communication happening between the test teams, the development teams, the security attackers, the defensive teams, and it's kind of like an interactive learning exercise. I think that's very important. And that's as much a value add as it is a learning experience for everybody. And that's really key, I think, for staying ahead of some of these. So, and touching on one of the previous points, I think what matters most is how fast you can detect something happen and respond. So I think that's another key point of, it's not just about prevention, it's about resilience. So I think preparing for these beyond predictive assessments is also preparing the resilience model, not just the risk model. Because predictive is so based on risk, I think we need to shift the focus to resilience. So how fast can we isolate and contain? What is I think it's the MSSP, like the mean time to respond, is very important as a metric in the culture.
So that's all a part of smarter preparedness, right?
Yes.
That's how it is.
And we've
So,
seen,
yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, please
We
go.
have seen some really good tools in the predictive security assessments. It's especially in transportation. We see lots of, for example, you can quickly look at a model and detect the attack surfaces, the inputs and outputs. I think there's a place for these predictive assessments, and it can help speed up the process. But really, because of these APTs and the nature of these attacks that are following kind of a different path, I think we need to get that culture more inherent. So.
You're right. So we had earlier referred to AI tools that can help you doing predictive assessments and the like. And as you've added, they can also help to create a more resilient security policy, for instance, or even a strategy. Do you think the increasing use of AI is driving stronger attacks as well? Because AI plays a double role there. The attacks can be more deadly, but the defense can also be better with an AI tool. So because of deep fakes and loads of other things. I mean, I can't think of anything right now, but the risks are much higher,
Oh,
right?
yes. I can think of so many examples, and it's a two-sided coin. If
Hmm.
you're going to if we are going to embrace AI to help speed up some of the development and identification of interfaces and risks, it can also be used for an attack scenario or lodging an attack. And if we kind of zoom out of transportation and think about some of the oldest examples of this, at least the ones that I've seen are, if you've seen those videos pop up now on social media where somebody can make a video that looks like it's a president talking or someone talking and the face is there, and they're using,
Yes.
some of them are there for financial purposes, but really those are very scary because it poses the biggest challenge is identity trust. Who can you trust? Who are we communicating with? And that's one of the big kind of, at least campaigns that I see happening in the AI today is the deep fakes, the voice cloning, the spear phishing. It's indistinguishable from the real thing. That's pretty scary. So I think the way forward is multi-layered, and it needs to be dynamic in identity verification. We need to educate everybody, the staff, the employees, the executives, on how we can actually use AI to power anomaly detection and how we can flag these unusual communication patterns. Also could be part of the MXDR and endpoint detection response of kind of anomalies and strange things happening. And I think at the CISO level, just being prepared and having a proactive AI governance is going to be very important. So how are we using AI to power our systems? And then how could AI be used for deepfakes and having really good phishing simulations? I hope that every organization is getting those annoying phishing emails reported, take the phishing training. it seems annoying, but it's very important because we need to, that's part of the culture and education that we need to stay keen on. So, those are some of the points I think to keep in mind.
So, does supply chain security, does it come under industrial security? Is it a part of industrial security, end-to-end vendor management and all of that?
Yes. Industrial is such a touchy subject. With my background coming from manufacturing, engineering, and test facilities, these industrial systems were created to be repeatable, easy to understand, easy to troubleshoot, plug and play. And they weren't really designed with security in mind. And that's really what makes the ICS, the industrial control systems, so highly vulnerable to attacks, especially when they're connected to an IT network, which is designed to just connect to anything and everything for all kinds of use cases. So that's, I think, the driving point from 0 Day that made it so painfully real is the physical consequences. Take a railway system, the airport and airplane systems. You have some highly connected situations there. And then if you have an industrial control system that may be outdated and old manufacturing facilities, the way forward to prevent that is really multi-layered. So we need to really understand every asset in the ICS, the industrial control system, and the OT environment. Operational technology is important to discuss here. And really, traditionally, we see these two being separate, the operational technology and the ICS, but really, it's really important to foster that collaboration to get operational technology and ICS, industrial control systems, to speak the same language. I think that's a really key point here. And also using the IT to our advantage and creating a defensive, safe environment where we can do testing. Some people call it digital twin, device twin. So really having a separate system where we can do testing, launch testing, do cybersecurity simulations and attacks, I think that's also going to be key. And we're seeing that more and more now because that's been a key part of how cloud compute and just testing happened with digital twin. But I think in the OT and ICS environment, I think that's a key point we're starting to see more of, which is great. And are you familiar with the Purdue model? The Purdue model is a nice model that kind of lays out the OT and ICS system hierarchy from physical, similar to the OSI 7-layer model, but it's basically a 5-layer model of going from enterprise IT down to the physical sensors. So it's important to kind of understand those layers and how we want to protect and prepare ICS and OT systems in this way. So definitely a lot of work to do in that space, and happy to work in that space because it's exciting. A lot of opportunity.
So something just occurred to me, and this is slightly more extracurricular. What happens when quantum computers come in?
Yeah, quantum computers. It's fascinating.
Everything gets out of gadget because whatever has been planned till now will not hold anymore.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me to read about quantum compute and how it's so different from traditional computing and how that's going to be used and leveraged. And thinking back 3 years ago, AI was the big buzzword everybody was excited about and researching. Now we're hearing about quantum computing. Yeah, I think it's an interesting space, and I think it's all about preparation. And really, at the CISO level, what it comes down to is understanding the impact. So if there's I'll give you an example. If there's a new feature that's coming out that the market is pushing for, but if the impact of an attack or a threat is so large, a CISO can say no. And I think that's so important in that culture for CISO and readiness and awareness, is being able to say no, being able to evaluate what the impacts are, and really driving that culture. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in the quantum compute space and understanding how that could change the face of how AI or just compute platforms can deal with and create some of these impacts. So I think still the underlying theme is resilience over prevention. So think of it as a matter of time and assume breach, focus on detection, response, and recovery. And that's really the key takeaway here, for me at least.
Right. One last question, and this just for my information. 0 Day was a very scary scenario. Have you seen any similarly, if not as bad, but almost there kind of a scary scenario ever in your professional life of an APT which really paralyzes an entire supply chain or just brings down a company or really really bad?
Yeah, I've seen it definitely. I've seen it on the professional side of companies and products. I've also seen it in countries battling other countries. There's so many examples of this on the supply chain side, infiltrating a supply to launch an attack and hurting people, which is very scary and unfortunate, but real. I've also seen it where I worked in the agriculture industry as well for 6 years. Yeah, actually, almost 8 years. Wow, that was my past life. But definitely saw many examples there of just something you wouldn't think would be so critical. But if you could disable a country's ability to harvest crops, the harvest season is so short. You have when the crops become mature, you have 1 or 2 weeks to be able to harvest an entire field of, let's say, wheat or whatever the product is. If you could disable the machines to harvest those, you could have devastating impacts. It's very real. And we have definitely seen some evidence of that happen in that industry. And it's almost in every industry, and it's real and it's scary. So then the conversation becomes, okay, how do you respond to that? What is the backup plan? What could you do in that case? And it was fascinating to see how companies responded to that. But it's very real, to answer your question. I've definitely seen lots of evidence of that at the nation state and kind of just general safety of people, but also at a country level, at a product level.
Yeah,
It's very real.
that's what I was going to say, because if it impacts a harvest and an entire season, then the entire economy is impacted.
Yes. And there's so many impacts there. The economy could be impacted. And, there's many countries that could back up, and maybe we have crops that could come from other places or food. Thank God that there is a pretty vast supply of this, but it could have devastating impacts. And even thinking of that in a different way, even just the data, having access to that data of what some of the yields could be, you could actually use that as insider information and hedge the markets if you knew what the yields were for a season. So there's many ways to look at it. The data is important. Obviously, I think the first importance is safety, people safety, product safety, road safety, general users, and protecting the population. But there's also lots of other impacts and financial, reputational losses. So really, it is a pretty wide, evolving space. And that's why it's just important to have that culture and always understand, how can the data be used? Are there safety impacts? What do we do if in case it's happened? So an example of this is when a country's vehicles were attacked and some of the vehicles were stolen so that they couldn't be used, the manufacturer had an ability to disable, because they were being driven, they were stolen. The manufacturer had the ability to stop the vehicles in their track and use a geolocation to identify the location of the vehicles and where they were. It's phenomenal. So that's like quick response, quick detection, shut it down. And I think that was pretty cool to see and live through. So,
Well, that's another film in the making. I'd just like to see the best mans, and the vehicles are being controlled by, I don't know, some threat actor somewhere, and well, we don't know what to do. I just hope they have Julia Roberts in that film as well.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk about it when it happens. Then it'll be an educational piece, but also a little too real and scary.
Yeah. So this was for today, and I do hope we can speak again on this subject, because there is so much more I needed to cover. But in the given time that we have today, that was only this much. But I thank you so much, Rami, for making time for us. Super grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Kanika. Great speaking to you, and I hope we speak
Don't
again.
go away. Don't go away. Stay there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being with us. Please do follow us on social media for regular updates and new content.